Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host today. My next guest is somebody that I have been anxiously anticipating interviewing for a couple months now. His name is Kenton Cool, and he is one of the world's leading high-altitude climbers and avid adventurers. This was everything I had hoped it would be in a conversation around adventure and suffering and exploration and learning about oneself. Kenton is such a unique individual, such a kind, generous person to have a conversation with me around these topics. And when you read his resume, I think you'll agree. He has climbed Everest 17 times, which is a non-Sherpa record, as well as many other peaks around the world, including the 7 summits, which are the highest summits on each of the 7 traditional continents. Kenton was also the first person in history to complete the Everest Triple Crown, which is summiting Everest, Nuptse, and Lhotse on a single climb, and he's the only Brit to have skied down 2 8,000-meter peaks. For us Americans, that's really high, even though it's not in miles or feet. Kenton is a popular and influential keynote speaker as well, as you can imagine with the life stories that he has. He draws from his many experiences as a high-altitude leader and shares his notable ability to take and make critical decisions and build high-performance teams. His talks touch on the importance of self-belief, passion, and mindset when setting and achieving both personal and professional goals. And you'll hear this in our conversation about how he uses his mindset to change the way that he interacts with the world around him. It was really powerful and something that I'll take away. But one of the coolest parts of the conversation was towards the end, as he gives some very vivid detail around what it's like to be at the roof of the world on top of Everest. And I think you'll have some great takeaways. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Kenton Cool. All right, Kenton Cool, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. We were chit-chatting here a little bit before we started, and I absolutely have been anticipating this conversation for a couple months. And based on your experience and bio and the things that you've accomplished, I think you're the perfect person to ask some of these questions that I ask a lot of my guests, to see what it is that makes you tick and what you learn from doing these challenging adventures. So first of all, thank you for spending the time in your evening to join me and be on my podcast.
No, absolute pleasure, Josh. And yeah, just so the audience know, you have been so patient and diligent. I missed the first one. I think I took my son swimming.
Okay.
And then was trying to get his dinner together and completely missed our scheduled conversation. So apologies about that. But they say all good things come to those who wait. So
here we are.
Fingers crossed it's going to be elevated and amplified, because this is you digging your feet in and finally getting to where you want to be.
Well, now you've raised the bar. I got a little bit more anticipation even after that. So what I'd like for us to start with is just tell everybody a little bit about Kenton Cool, who you are, where you're at, and what do you spend your days doing?
Where to start? What I spend my days doing, there is no one day that seems to be the same. I suppose I'm known for being an Everest leader or guide or climber, depending how you find me. I've climbed Everest numerous times, always in the capacity of being a mountain guide. I'm a IFMGA mountain guide, which doesn't mean things to everybody. IFMGA is the International Federation of Mountain Guides Association. So think Top Gun. There's about 120 of us in the UK. There's probably not many more in the US, possibly even less in the US. It's more of an alpine nations of France, Germany, Switzerland. And it is a qualification that allows me to work pretty much anywhere in the mountains, anywhere in the world. It's a little tiny weeny pin badge that doesn't really represent the amount of heartache, toil, blood, sweat, tears that goes into it.
What does go into it? How do you get that designation?
Oh my God, I got to start having heart palpitations. I mean, for me, it was 5 years, I think it was, of various assessments. So each nation has a slightly different route to becoming an IFMGA. So the IFMGA is a governing body, and then each nation has slightly different qualification process. But in the UK, there's a rock climbing aspect. So we have a week's rock climbing not rock climbing tuition, but we learn the skills in order to guide others on rock if we're going out rock climbing. We then go away, hone that skills, and about 6 months later, we take an assessment, which again is a week long. If you pass that, you go on to the winter, which is in Scotland, which is arguably the hardest section in the UK test. There's navigation, there's like wilderness first aid, there's climbing, client care, everything you can possibly imagine in Scotland in winter, where it gets dark really quickly, the weather's appalling. You're under strain and stress of the assessor. You have what we call guinea pigs, who are members of the public that come in and act as clients. Past that, it gets a little bit better. You go to the European Alps, and we have an alpine test and a ski test. And then you go away for about a year and hone that skill, and then you come back and your logbook gets assessed. And if everything looks great, you pass out as a mountain guide. And I think it takes about 4 to 5 years in the UK. There's prerequisites. The French is slightly different. So the French generally are a little bit better at skiing, perhaps, but then maybe not quite so good at navigation. Or we've all got a little things that we're slightly better or slightly worse at. My weakness is skiing, despite the fact I love it. It's the arrow in my quiver that's perhaps not quite as good as my ice climbing or rock climbing or mountaineering.
Really? But you have skied down some of the largest mountains in the world, though, correct?
Yeah, but yes, I have. I skied down Choyoya, which is the 8th highest mountain in the world, back in 2010. And then I didn't enjoy it. Really, the snow was terrible. I was skiing on my own. I was super stressed. So I went back a couple of years later and skied down, which was no better, to be honest. High altitude skiing, I don't care what anybody tells you. It's not the best skiing in the world. Because generally, if snow is good to climb, it's rubbish to ski, and vice versa.
Oh.
But as I always say to everybody, you got to get up these mountains first to be able to ski down them. So I think my skill set as a mountaineer enabled me to get to the top and ski down, or side slip and snow plow and swear, and it wasn't great skiing.
Is there a lot of that coming off of high peaks?
What swearing and shouting?
No, more of the snow plow and the side turns and just sliding.
Yeah. On big mountains when you're skiing, there is. I mean, we all have this rose-tinted spectacles that it's going to be, beautiful fluffy powder and amazing backdrops, but in reality, you're tired. You often on the big peaks you're wearing a down suit and you're hot because the sun's come up, and you're thirsty and you're in the death zone. So there's rarefied air that you're trying to breathe, and it's exposed to wind and the elements. So you got hard packed snow, then you might have sastrugi, which is like the wind blowing little ridges that you get, and because you can't really pick your day. It's not like resort skiing. If you go to, I don't know if you ski, Josh, but maybe you go to Vale or Aspen and you've got your nice piste, or if the weather's atrocious this day, you don't go out, or that there's going to be powder in the Highland Bowl or whatever it may be. You don't have that privilege. So it's a case of, you choose your summit day based on the climb and the weather and the conditions. You get to the top and you just got to cross your fingers and hope for the best. That the ski is going to be okay. I think you can speak to anybody. Adrian Ballinger, the guide based in Mammoth, I think. I mean, he skied a couple of 8,000-meter peaks. I think he'd probably say exactly the same thing. You go there for the experience, for the journey, not necessarily for the skiing. Dave Watson's another one, like the older guard. But so skiing is arguably my weaker discipline. But you got to be a fully qualified guide. You got to be competent, more than competent, in all those areas to pass out.
Got to be able to do it all.
And then once you pass out, in theory, you can work in the Alpine nations around the world and legally. So for me, the Matterhorn, the Eiger, Mont Blanc, they're almost on my doorstep here in Europe. So my summers are spent quite often guiding in the European Alps. Spring is normally on Everest. I'm off to Everest actually next week with a got a set of twins, which should be really cool to work with. I've got a set of twins I'm working with on Everest. The autumn times, quite often on lecture tours. I'm a father of two. You and I were talking about that beforehand. An 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. I've got a fantastic wife at home. So, like any adventurers that and you know this yourself, Josh. It's a balancing act between what we're really passionate about in terms of for ourselves, the outdoors, the adventure, the adrenaline, whatever we search for in the outdoors. But then there's also you've got to balance that out with the needs and wants and desires of the family.
Yeah.
And then you've got to go out and earn money as well, or I like to call them play credits, where you can transfer money into play credits. So it's a balancing act, and it's really difficult to get that balance right. And I defy anybody that says, "Yeah, I've got that nailed. I've got that. I've got that totally, totally balanced." Because there's always one thing that's got to give. But like we found out a couple of weeks ago when I got engrossed with the family or my son and missed the scheduled call with you. So that was a bit rude of me. But there's always a give and take there somewhere, and it's a quest I think that we all constantly seek. And unless you're super selfish, I think it's a quest that you never really find the true answers.
Every day is a little different, and I think I completely agree that the idea of a totally balanced life is probably a misnomer. At least of being able to have that every single day, because like you said, every day is a bit different. And every now and then I'll come across folks that will present as if they've got everything together, and will even say as such that they live a balanced life. And in the back of my head, I'm going, there's probably there's something else they're not telling me the truth about, because the idea that it's
unless you have a big pool of cash somewhere that you can dip in and you eradicate one of those pools on your time, i.e. work. I suppose if you eradicate that, it might be easier to find that balance, maybe, or and maybe there's a significant amount of childcare being. But you're right. I mean, there's I'm the same. I mean, I just don't believe that true balance actually exists. I think it's for the individual. It's their own journey, and it's finding balance that works for them. It's not going to work all the time, though, is it?
Right.
There's a give and take there somewhere. And
I think,
I'm like, go on.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to ask the question of when you're switching between these different roles that you're playing in your life. Is that an easy switch, or does it take some time? Are you able to compartmentalize these different parts of your life and be all in on that particular piece, or is it more difficult than just being black and white like that?
Yeah, I think it's more difficult. I mean, it was a number of years ago I moved, but I used to live in the European Alps. I was living as a mountain guide in Chamonix, arguably the adventure capital of the world, town, and literally in the shadow of Mont Blanc. And I was single, and I was working as a mountain guide. And when I wasn't working, I was out in the mountains for me, climbing or skiing or whatever it is I was doing. And then, like many of us, things slowly change. Well, for me, it actually changed quite rapidly. I met a girl that became my wife. She had a job and still does a job, which is more UK based. So I literally chased her back to the UK and pretty much up sticks and moved from Chamonix back to, I live in the Cotswolds, beautiful part of the UK, but there's not much climbing and there is no skiing here. Well, it's not strictly true. We've got a dry ski slope, but when you explain that to Americans, they're like, "What the hell is that?"
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's like a wire mesh carpet type thing. Anyway, we don't have any skiing there. That's the easiest way to describe it. And it used to be a case that I found myself back in the UK. I would still travel a lot. I was doing my Himalayan climbing, but I'd look out the window one day and it'd be blue sky. I'd just be thinking, "Oh, this is a great day to go rock climbing or maybe ice climbing, whatever it is, and I can't. I'm in the UK." And time had moved on a little bit. I think maybe my daughter had been born, and I found myself in a position whereby it was either I need to recalibrate my parameters about what is important to me and be more honest with myself rather than trying to project a persona which others were kind of expecting me. I've always been known as, a little bit of the yes man. If somebody wanted an adventure, hey, ring up Kenton. He's bound to say yes and get involved. So that was the persona that I was projecting. I came back to the UK and I found myself in a really ugly situation whereby I was beginning to become resentful of everything. I've been pulled back to the UK. There's now a very young daughter taking a lot of my time and my energy, and being, an inhibitor for perhaps what I wanted to do. And I really had to look within myself to try to find out how I was going to deal with that. And to a degree, is what you said. It's almost trying to put things into individual boxes of, okay, things have changed. My perspective has changed. It's changed for a reason. I've been part of that change. And maybe I need to relax a little bit on the need to constantly be out pushing myself, because it's not going to happen. There's going to be this constant jar, this constant clash, and I'm never going to be satisfied. And once I kind of took that decision whereby my own perspective needs to change, things have moved on. I'm not like a young spunker, so to speak, single in Chamonix anymore. And this is a path that I have chosen to take. And there needs to be an understanding that there's a family unit now, and I need to go out and work and perhaps be more responsible with the way that I conduct myself. Once I kind of worked that through in my own head, I found that I was much more at one when I looked out on a bluebird day and had to change nappies or do the school run, or support my wife, who's also got, like I say, she's got a proper job, and she needs to be in London quite a lot, so she's away. And the key thing for that was, this is my choice. This is my decision. I didn't have to come down this path, but I have. And with that I used the word before, responsibility. So things need to shift. And once I had that internal dialogue, I was much happier being in the UK than perhaps I had been before.
How did you know to do that? How did you work yourself through that? Is that a life skill that you've used in other places? Does it come out, that kind of self-talk and self-talking through a thing? Is that part of what you do on the mountain? But I'm curious how you got to that
a little
point.
bit. I mean, luckily my wife is, I suppose you call her like an exec coach, a leadership coach. And she's fantastic at identifying, well, not even identifying, just asking the questions. I'd be walking around the house like a bear with a sore head. And she would, just keep asking the questions, normally questions that began with why or what or where.
Mm-hmm.
And she, incredibly supportive. And when she would get to the number of it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm looking on social media. I mean, Jesus, I mean, how bad is social media when you're trying to work through something like this? Because all your mates are sharing this. Oh my God. Yeah, and it's untrue. I mean, most of the time, what we see on social media, complete BS.
Yeah, you're looking at somebody's best point of their best day, not their real life.
Yeah, but this is like, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, and I'm looking through this, and I'm sat changing yet another nappy, or in my mind being held back from being able to go rock climbing. And Jazz would just say, listen, I think it's got to the point that you need to go away and book yourself a flight somewhere, go and find a mate, go skiing, go ice climbing, go rock climbing, whatever you need to do. Just go away and come back in, say, 3 or 4 or 5 days' time. And this happened a couple of times, to the point that I was thinking, well, if I'm building myself up to this position whereby it's getting so bad each time that my wife is saying, get out of the house, come back when you've had your little fix, a bit like the addict, go and get your fix, come back when you're all sane and you're mellow and you're nice to live with again. And this happened a couple of times, and it was like, this can't continue to happen. What needs to change? And it was definitely a gradual thing. And where we are now, I mean, we're still in the Cotswolds. I mean, we've moved 5 miles up the road. There's still no climbing here. There's still there's skiing here. But that work on myself is not perfect, and I'm not there yet completely, because I still get uptight from time to time. I still feel somewhat shackled from time to time. But that work on myself it took a little bit of time, and it was investment into the family. It was investment at the time to my daughter. There's, my son's now 11, but at the time it was just Saffron. It was spending time with her. It was the understanding that you can get joy from other things. My life up to that point had literally been adventure, adrenaline, climb, ski. That's it. And once I learned that you can get joy, and once I was more honest with myself, more transparent with me, rather than trying to constantly project this image of the yes man that would always be out climbing, the one that always put more, more ski runs down than anybody else, or would climb more vertical, or would push himself to the limit till his fingertips were bleeding when you were climbing. That was honestly probably a bit of a fallacy, certainly towards the end of when I was doing it all the time. Because that's what people expected of me, because I built that up over the years. And in reality, I wasn't being true to myself. And once I learned how to be more true with myself, then I think I became a better father.
Yeah.
I definitely became a better husband. It was easier to live with myself. And actually, when I do go climbing and skiing and mountaineering, the joy I get from that is amplified because I'm not doing it all the time. So all of a sudden, it's not a balance, Josh. I'm not saying this is Barnum of the balance, but that inner work that I did to myself, with the help of my wife and to a certain extent my daughter at the time, it was crucial to where I am today. I mean, I think I would have just like tied myself up into knots. I probably would have, like, marriage would have just blown up, and I'd probably be living like a dirt bum climber in the Alps somewhere.
Yeah.
Whereas in reality, being very truthful, this is where I want to be. I want to be with a family and be able to dip my toe back into the life that I had. Because Jazz once said to me, if you had the opportunity to just rewind the clock, well, not even rewind the clock, but to parachute yourself back into where you were, say, 20 years ago, would you want to do it? And I went away and chewed on that for a bit. I thought, no, actually, to give up everything I have here, to relive what I had 20 years ago, do I really want that? And the truth of the matter is, no, I didn't. And that was an impactful thing that she said. Would you give up everything you got now to relive those carefree days 20 years ago? And the truth is, no. Very happy.
It would cost you too much to do that.
100%. And it is the truth. It's being at one with the decisions that we make and finding the balance, finding love with those around you. I mean, I mean, I'm super lucky. I mean, I still get out to the hills. I mean, I'm off to Nepal next Tuesday. I mean, I can't wait to go.
Well, that's interesting to me, though, to see the mental exercise that then led to a mind shift for you to be able to accept your reality rather than wishing it to be different. You just accepted it. And from that came, I mean, what you just described was just gratitude for every part of your life. Not just the climbing, not just the family, but it sounds like your level of gratitude for all of it was raised because you are living in all of those pieces of your life rather than all in on just one of them.
I hit the nail on the head, Josh. Yeah, there's a piece. Because before I was like, I was wound up like a tight rag, and just like, and everything had to be now or yesterday, and the joy which I was finding from, say, rock climbing, I think I was just going through the motions. Whereas now, yes, of course, I would like to rock climb more, but at the same time, I'd like to spend more time with my family, and I'd like to spend more time with my wife, and arguably I'd like to spend more time with my clients, because my work is in the outdoors, and I love being with my clients. Whereas, so there is gratitude for all of that. Whereas before, I think going through the motions, oh yes, it's another day rock climbing, and perhaps your senses aren't quite as attuned to. Yes, I was climbing harder, but now when I go climbing, I hear the bird song more, or I have a greater appreciation for the environment which I'm climbing in. Be it, I go rock climbing relatively local to here. Relatively local is about an hour away, and it's on a lazy S bend in this big river called the River Wye. And most people, if you speak to them about the Y Valley climbing, they go, "Oh yeah, I mean that's crap. It's not particularly good climbing." And 20 years ago, I probably would have agreed. Whereas now I go there and I find joy in, in everything else, not
That's
just the climb.
incredible. Yeah, that's
Uh,
incredible.
so gratitude, yeah, I think that's good, is a good term as well. I mean, I'm super grateful to be where I am, having been on the journey. There's been ups and downs.
Yeah.
But I look back to those days when I was looking out the window and I was screwing myself up. I just like, oh, I've got to get out. I've got to climb.
Yeah.
I've got to ski. Jesus, Instagram, scrolling through more powder, more ice, more climb. It's just like, shit, that needs to be me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. It
Well, I
really
think
doesn't.
there's something. I've got a few questions that are in my mind from a few of the things you just said, but I think, I mean, a lot of what you're describing was almost like an addict's withdrawal of you've had this thing so much and so easily accessible that it gets taken away, and it's like a visceral physical response to it, to not having the thing, and you had to work your way through that. I mean, the way you just described it is beautiful. Like, to get to that point of gratitude and finding joy in crap climbs, that is like, that's it, man. That is such a cool way to describe it. And where it takes me though in my mind is, where did what did young Kenton look like? What did growing up look like to get you to a point where in your young adult years you were saying yes to everything? Why were you doing that? So tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what your relationship with the outdoors was like as a kid.
I mean, I grew up just outside London. I was born in a town called Slough, which probably won't mean that much to some of your audience, but if you mention it to anybody in the UK, you mention Slough, everybody starts to titter. It was famous for a poem that had a line in it, something along the lines of "Come friendly bombs, come rain on Slough," written by Sir John Betjeman, the poet laureate at the time. And then it became famous for Mars Bar Factory, and then The Office, the original series of The Office, the Ricky
Oh, was
Gervais
it really?
sitcom. Yeah, it was set in Slough, which kind of just elevated the grey doldrums. And Slough's very flat. There's no climbing and blah blah blah. So I was born there, grew up just outside London, but and this is a huge but. I grew up on a corner of a farm. Now we didn't own the farm. We rented a small cottage with no mains drainage, no central heating, but it was on a corner of a farm in a farm field. And we were surrounded by woods and fields, which allowed me as a child to be outside all the time, like literally all the time. And I remember vividly, I must have been about 10, maybe perhaps a bit younger. And they built what's known as the M25, it's like orbital motorway that goes around London. And they built this through the farmland. And I just remember day after day after day playing in the woods, playing Russian roulette with these monster diggers that were building the motorway. And my friends and I would just like steal bits of wood from the motorway and build dens and tree houses. And having access to that outdoors from an early age, even though I lived so close to London, was so important. Add to that, I was a Boy Scout. I mean, now it's not Boy Scouts, it's boys and girls, but at the time it was Boy Scouts.
Mhm.
My father was actually the scout leader. He had a pretty good understanding about bushcraft, for want of a better word. He could identify all the trees and birds and animals. So from quite an early age, there was this sense of the importance of the outdoors. Knowing what trees you could cut down to build a fire with, which ones are going to light quicker, which ones are going to taint your wood, like elder, for instance. If you cut and burn elder, the smoke is going to taint the taste of your food.
Hmm.
And so it went on. So from a really, even though I wasn't climbing, none of my parents climb or ski or any of that, but there was this grounding very early on into being in the outdoors, sometimes being hot and thirsty, sometimes being cold and hungry or wet, constantly falling into the little river, which was at the end of the road, building dams, falling out of trees, building dens and sort of sleeping overnight. I would have breakfast. This is when I wasn't at school. I'd have breakfast. You call up your friend, you meet your friend somewhere, between the two houses, and that would be it for the day. And you might go to his house for supper, or he might come to your house for supper, and it was day after day after day. So I learned a lot through that. Even stupid things like jumping barbed wire fences, and all sorts of. Were they bad things? Well, no, not really. Were they completely legal? Some of the stuff we were doing? No, probably not. But it was a fantastic upbringing. And I look at today's culture a little bit, and this is a broad brushstroke, Josh. I look at today's culture, and I've got one here. This is my phone that I'm holding up. I know the audience can't see it. And we're guilty of this a little bit. I mean, I think my son's downstairs now because he's on school holidays, and he's probably nose deep in he doesn't have a phone, but he's probably watching YouTube or something on one of our devices.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, deep down, I just want him outside, rolling around in the mud and falling out of a tree or coming in with a broken wrist. I think that grounding that I had, I think is really important. I think it's important for finding out who we are, finding out our endurance level, humility, leadership, friendship, community, whatever. I think it's all enhanced. This is my belief anyway. I think it's all enhanced when you're doing stuff in the outdoors. I mean, is it adventure? Well, when you're 10, it's real adventure. And I think that's really important. And that was definitely a building block. So when the opportunity came to first go climbing, it's outside. Of course I'm going to say yes. And, I jumped at the chance.
How old were you?
I was 17, 18. I came to climbing quite late. I used to play field hockey. So I played field hockey at relatively high standard. I used to play for like the county team. So you'd probably call it a state team.
Yeah.
And for the local club and for my school. So that took up my time. So I'd be playing or training for hockey 3-4 times a week. And then just before I went to university, a neighboring friend whose father was big into the outdoors and climbed a little bit. I asked this friend of mine, will you take me climbing? And Andy said, yeah, hey, sure. Come down to the local climbing wall. This is back in the late 80s. So there weren't that many indoor climbing gyms. There's certainly not as we know them today. So I went down to the climbing gym once or twice with him. And then he said, hey, he could drive. I couldn't. He said, hey, I got my mum's car this weekend. Why don't we go to the Peak District? And it wasn't Peak District. It was the south coast of the UK. Why don't we go down there and rock climb outside for real? And I fell in love with it. It's just like, oh my God, this is amazing. We camped overnight. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were climbing on a sea cliff, the waves crashing underneath us, both probably out of our depth, me especially so. And for me, this is nirvana. This was unbelievable because it challenged me physically. It challenged me mentally. Yet at the same time, I'm within an environment, i.e. the outdoors, that I felt quite comfortable in. I was comfortable camping. I was comfortable boiling up water to make a cup of tea in the morning or whatever it may be. I was comfortable with all of that. And God, those first few days rock climbing, I'm there right now talking to you. I mean, I can close my eyes and I can almost taste the exhaustion that I felt in my muscles after that first day, and the sweat and the stress and the adrenaline and the anxiety. And oh my God, it was amazing.
That's,
Absolutely.
What's cool is your growing up experience of being, almost a feral animal, just roaming the farmland, doing whatever crazy stunts you could get yourself into. You described it as you're expanding your confidence in yourself. So I don't think you get to 17 and climb a seacoast wall without having expanded your, some call it the window of tolerance, expanding your window of tolerance for what you feel you're capable of without having that be such a big part of your childhood. And I know a lot of 17-year-olds, I was probably one of them, where I couldn't, I couldn't have done that. I liked being outside, but it's like there are several steps to get to that point. And it makes sense to me that your childhood led to that point of being able to get on the side of a wall that goes straight up, and not be so scared that you can't do it. And so I am curious. So how did that kid from just outside of London end up in the some of the biggest mountains in the world, and doing things that are a lot harder than climbing a seacoast?
Well, I mean, I think before we get to just as you were saying there, Josh, I just had this thought. The other thing which I think was quite important when growing up was we had no money. So my father was unemployed for a lot of my teenage years. So nothing was rose tinted. Nothing was silver plated, gold plated. It was. I mean,
Smart, I would imagine.
there was no holiday club. There was no like tomorrow, for instance, or the next day. I'm taking my son to pre-season cricket practice. So he's playing cricket all day long for the next 3 days. No cricket. Some average, the average American. Oh my God, that's that stupid game that lasts. But anyway, so there was no clubs. There was nothing going on. It was literally a case of, well, we needed to entertain ourselves. There's no devices. It was a case of just get out there and do whatever you want to do. My mother was working during the day. My father had ad hoc job. He's a photographer, but he was around sometimes and not around other times, depending on what was going on with the various jobs that he had. And I think that also had quite a big thing with that. I don't know if it was confidence, because I was constantly looking around at the other children thinking, well, they've got the latest. It wasn't Nike at the time, but tops or trainers, and I had none of that. My father was sticking my shoes back together, so I'd go back to school, and and this isn't looking for any sympathy or that, but you learn to adapt, and you learn to make do with what you have, and you find the joy and you find the enjoyment with the process, not necessarily. I didn't go abroad until I was 14 or so. We used to just holiday in West Wales. It was normally lashing rain, and we'd sit on the beach and we, get the sheet of canvas out and pull it over the windbreak. These stupid things you knock in the sand, and we'd sort of sit there eating our sardine sandwiches. And this was fantastic. This was.
You didn't know any different.
No, I didn't know any different. And I think that built I hate this word, but I use it because I'm spacing any other word, like a resilience. And certainly, I mean, if you fast forward to the bigger mountains, and we get onto this, I'm sort of hijacking it a little bit. I became that yes man. We mentioned it earlier. I used to be the yes man because I could put up with suffering. I wasn't the best climber. I wasn't the fastest climber. I wasn't the most technically adept, but I could suffer, and I would put up with being cold or hot, or carry a heavy load with up and down the mountain, or whatever it may be. And I think that comes back to the upbringing, the long days, and having to fend for yourself, and sat on the beach in the pissing rain while eating my soggy sardine sandwiches my mother had made me that day. But there were such fond memories. They really were.
At that time, did you view it as suffering, or did you view it just, this is life?
I mean, partly it was life, and to be honest, Josh, sometimes you're looking over your shoulder and you're seeing the other kids, they're off to Spain or America on holiday, or they're going to Disney World, or whatever it may be, or they've got the nice clothes. Because I actually grew up in quite an affluent area, or the parents have the new cars, or whatever it may be, and we had none of that. But oddly, and this is a really interesting thing, which I only really realized until relatively recently, all the other kids wanted to come to my house all the time. They wanted to hang out at our house. Not because we had no rules, because there were rules, but there was always this pool. There was always like this little cohort of people, transiting through our house. Some would come and stay for a couple of nights. I mean, we lived in a tiny bungalow. I remember one Christmas we had like 13 or 14 people around for Christmas dinner. The table barely barely sat four of us.
Wow.
And we managed to make it work. And despite the fact that we had very little, everything was shared. And it was a pretty relaxed, relatively so, pretty relaxed atmosphere at our house. And as much as I like going to the other people's houses because they had the nice toys and they had the train sets, the scale electrics. Oh my goodness, how much I wanted the scale electric. And I'm just like looking over my shoulder now because I'm sat in the playroom where we have this little studio set up, and my son's got a scale electric somewhere, and he never uses it. I would have died for those when I was growing up. I honestly, I would have given my left arm to have a scale electric. All my mates had them. And that gives you a veneer of adaptation, I suppose, for want of a better word. And that is, I think, again, a good life skill to have. But I suppose to answer your question, I mean, how did I move on from that sea cliff to the big mountains? Well, there's a very easy answer to that. I went to university. I get to Leeds University, and in the UK we call it Freshers Week. It's a week where all the newbies are there, and there's all these things set on, and generally everybody gets drunk, and there's Freshers Fair, and you can join a debating society or the hockey club or the whatever it is, the yachting club or the horse riding club or the climbing club. And I just found climbing. And I was like, oh my God. So I think I joined two societies or two clubs. I joined the hockey club and I joined the climbing club. And the climbing club, Josh, I mean, it's difficult to explain the energy that this club had. And I know that every club has ebbs and flows. And if anybody follows soccer, the Manchester, I don't really follow soccer, but Manchester United, they were the all dominant club at one stage, and then now they're like their so-so club. Or I'm trying to think of an analogy over there in the US. When I grew up, I used to loosely follow American football, and Miami Dolphins were like unbeatable with Dan Marino, quarterback. I mean, there's nothing they couldn't do. Or San Francisco 49ers, all clubs go in ebbs and flows. And when I was at Leeds University Climbing Club was like
the top.
The top. Oh my good. I mean, the energy. To give you an idea, there's 125 British mountain guides, full qualified mountain guides. 5 were at Leeds University at the same time. There's John Bracey, myself, Powell, Matt Dickinson, and Rich Cross. We are all mountain guides.
Wow.
And we were at Leeds at the same time. It just gives you, and people were going to the Alps in the summertime. They were climbing like after lectures, you jump on the bus and go to Ilkley or Otley, these nearby climbing areas. I was a second year. Was that second year or first year? Second year. It must have been a second year. I organized my first Himalayan expedition. I go to Pakistan. I'm 19 years old, and I organized an expedition to go to Pakistan. And it was just, and it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And there was a community. And I think this is the crucial point. They were a tribe, call it whatever you want to call it. And I think it's so important that as individuals, we got to find our tribe. And we may feel that we're an outlier or we don't fit into society or, whatever it may be. Eventually, we find our tribe. And once you do, then all of a sudden there's a sense of belonging. And with that brings confidence. And this is what I found at Leeds University. I found my tribe. I'd been quite happy playing field hockey. I didn't quite fit in at the local club, but there's enough of a community there to keep dragging me back to play every Saturday. I wasn't the most talented, but again, I was the yes guy, fully dependable. We're a player down, we'll call Kenton, he'll jump on his bicycle and ride down and he'll play. But at Leeds, I found a tribe, and it was just all consuming. And it was my hockey dropped off the radar a little bit because I couldn't commit enough time. I suppose you could say I found my addiction, though that paints a slightly evil.
It does. It has a connotation to it, but I think it highlights that the human brain. It's the same neural circuits that we have for joy and pain, right? it it doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just is the way our brain works. And I think the same in terms of addictions is that our brain is working in a certain way to keep us alive. And so, yeah, there are certain addictions that are more socially acceptable than others, but they all work the same way in the brain. And as the human species, we're a species that doesn't do anything unless there's a reward. And or if there's not a reward, we may not do that thing for very long. So what I hear you describing is, not a maladaptive addiction, but there was a reward for you that kept you coming back to this thing and getting better at this thing. What would you say was the reward? Why did you keep going back and trying to get better and better and better at this climbing thing?
And this is the interesting thing. I didn't realize it at the time. It's only subsequently it was recognition from my peers.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which isn't necessarily a fully wholesome reason to be doing this. So I would push myself more and more and more, so that on a Wednesday night, I think it was Wednesday night, we all used to meet in the pub, the Pack Horse pub, and you would tell stories of daring do's about what you've been up to for the last week or so, or someone say, "Oh, did you hear about Fred? He fell off, blah blah blah, and broke his leg," or somebody in hushed tones would say, "Well, Steve's just done like adrenaline rush at Cayley. Oh my God, he on-sighted it," and you'd be thinking, "Oh God, no, that should be me. That could be me.
Yeah,
okay, I need to get away and do something harder or faster." And so there was a little bit of that, and when I realized actually I wasn't as talented as most of the club, it's like, okay, well, and this is all subconscious, Josh.
Yes.
I'm not writing this out.
Yeah.
I'm not going home at night thinking, "Oh shit, okay, what do I need to do to impress my peers?" I realized that actually, I can't rock climb as hard as the others. I was actually really good in Scotland, though. I could hold my own in Scotland in winter, where you climbing snowed up rock and turf and ice and snow and things. I was pretty good up there. But when I found a niche was in the Himalayas. And I quickly learned that the Himalayas we mentioned it before, the Himalayas was arguably more about suffering and being away from home and sat under a top tarpaulin, eating the last few grains of rice that you have, and still being mad keen to go climbing the next day. It was as much about that as it was about technicality, or certainly at the time. And that's one of the reasons that I more moved, and my eyes shifted from climbing little gritstone outcrops in Yorkshire, the university is, to the Alps and then to the Himalayas, aided by two very prominent picture books, coffee table picture books by Sir Chris Bonington, arguably one of the most famous climbers ever to come out of the UK, and his sort of cohort climbing partner, friend, although they did clash from time to time, Doug Scott. And they published these amazing picture books. This is pre-internet, coffee table books. And I was one was called Himalayan Climber and the other Mountaineer, I think. I mean, it says it all. I'm reading these things and it's like, well, this is clearly where you need to go. If you need to make a name for yourself, you've got to be in the Himalayas. Hence the reason why a 19-year-old me, in conjunction with a couple of friends, put together an expedition to Pakistan, and off we went. And we were totally unsuccessful in our main objective. There was obscene amounts of suffering. Flying to Karachi to save money, catching a train from Karachi all the way through Pakistan, second class, because we couldn't afford anything else. And it was fantastic. It was absolutely magical.
Wow.
And that was, well, I quickly tell a little story, because I think this is pertinent to my continued love affair with the Himalayas. It was getting towards the end of the trip, and just to put it in context, I was in Pakistan for 7 weeks, and the whole thing, including my flight there, cost about $650. The whole thing. I mean, it was proper shoestring.
That is brilliant.
Yeah, we had no porters, we had no cook, we had like, we did all the shopping ourselves, we did all the cooking ourselves. It was cheapest flights we could find, second class travel, on the trains and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, the expedition's coming to an end. We've got one last attempt at a climb because we run out of food. And we climb what we think is a new route on this mountain. We think it's a new mountain, actually. It turns out it's not, but it's about the journey, not the destination. Let's face
Yes.
it. So we climb this mountain. We think it's a new mountain. We all cook. There's three of us. We all cock a hoot. We come off the back. We can't come down the same side. So we go off the back, and we run out of food. We'll run out of fuel. We've been on the go for 2 or 3 days, and we're coming down into the sort of alpine part, no, the Himalayan pastures, and there's somebody running towards us. And we're down in the pastures, and this person's running towards us, shaking a stick. And I'm like, oh God, this is going to be bad. And they're shouting. And it's a young boy, probably not much younger than us. Well, we're 19, or I was 19, and this boy is probably, I don't know, I'm guessing 16, 15, 16, 17. And he's a goat herder, and he spends all his summer looking after some goats in the high pastures. And he kind of beckons me. He's speaking Urdu. He doesn't speak a word of English. He kind of indicates that we need to follow him. So we follow him, and it's almost evening time. The sun's beginning to set. It's clear that we're not going to make we're certainly not going to make base camp. In fact, it took 2 days to get back to base camp. And he brings us into this little yurt, and we end up spending the night in this yurt. And he cooks for us. He gives us tea. He bakes bread. He breaks, I know it's a cliche, but he breaks bread with us. And I'm there with Al Powell. And Al at the time was, he's a vegan, plant-based diet, full-on plant-based diet, the first vegan I ever met. And this kid makes us tea, and he sloshes in some like butter and goat's milk, and makes his cup of tea, and he gives it to me, and he gives one to Al, and he gives one to Simon. And I remember looking at Al and I'm like, are you going to drink that? And he looks at me and goes, how can I not drink this? This is the vegan. And he's just like, that generosity from that individual, that boy, he had no idea who we were. There's no communication. He's got nothing. I mean, literally nothing. The yurt was a few goat skins over a few branches, and he's on his haunches, yet he gave us everything. And at that point, I fell in love as much with the people of the Himalayas as I did with the mountains themselves. And Josh, it doesn't really matter if you are in northern Pakistan, northern India, northern Bhutan, Nepal, Tibet. No, I'd probably put Afghanistan in there. I've not been to Afghanistan, but let's assume Afghanistan. There is a humility and a generosity of heart in those people that is unwavering. And I think part of it is that they have such a hard existence anyway, that they know nothing other than generosity. And certainly in Pakistan and Afghanistan, unfortunately, they've been tarred with terrorism and harbor terrorists and all that sort of thing. In reality, it is not like that. I mean, the people of Baltistan are just fabulous people. And that was a pivotal point in my life, let alone my private career.
And that is a beautiful story of generosity out of poverty, generosity out of, as you said, giving all that he had. He literally had nothing else, but he wanted to give that to you. And it also strikes me as very similar to that kid and family living on the corner of a farm outside of London that had 13 kids over for a Christmas dinner or some holiday gathering, when you didn't have nearly as much as all those other kids had. There probably, I can imagine, was a familiarity with that kind of generosity, and something that I can see attracting you towards that. And I want you to, if you would, so several of these different folks that I've interviewed that have done different kinds of adventures around the world, over and over again, they keep coming back to, it was the people. It was the people that I met. It was the people that I was with that made it such an epic period of time in my life. And you're saying the exact same thing in the Himalayas. So has that been consistent for you as you continue to go back to these similar spots?
Yeah. I mean, I 100%. And be it the people that I meet. I mean, the Himalayas especially so, because the Himalayas is one of these mountain ranges where you will still come across people that live. I wouldn't say in the high Himalayas, but certainly in the foothills. You can go to some villages that are really out there. I mean, it's changing a little bit now with helicopters and things like that, but it wasn't that long ago that you could trek for 2, 3, 4, 5 days and end up in a remote village. And you meet people there, maybe you meet the village elder or whoever it may be. Even in places in Pakistan and India where you stumble across army checkposts, in the middle of nowhere. And although they're not necessarily the local people, I mean, in India, maybe they've come from the plains down south or something, they're there and, your paperwork needs to be checked or whatever. So you sit down and you have a cup of tea with somebody and you try to spark up a conversation. And generally, I mean, I'm really rubbish at languages, but certainly some of the army posts, there's normally somebody that can speak a little bit of English. And we mentioned it earlier that there's nothing to break down barriers in India and Pakistan. They mention the cricket and bring up the cricket, and then before you know it, you've been invited for lunch or for dinner, or more tea comes out. And when it comes to time to leave, because you got to continue trekking to get to your base camp or your mountain and whatever, there is actually a part of you that you're almost leaving behind. You almost want to stay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think in today's society, the phones that we have, the devices that we have, WhatsApp or TikTok or whatever, it doesn't allow us to interconnect in quite the same way. And I mean, I'm known for Everest, and I go back I will be in Everest Base Camp in about 2 weeks' time, and I can't wait to be spending time with my Sherpa friends again. Now, admittedly, they're not quite the goat herder on the side of a mountain in Pakistan, because a lot of them live in Pakistan. They all have phones, and I can chat to them relatively frequently on WhatsApp and things like that. But they are a different culture, and they are, English isn't their first language, and I love spending time with them. The majority of my Sherpas grew up in a place called Pangboche, which is what, 5 days walk from the nearest road.
Oh my gosh.
And Dorji used to trek over an hour to go to school every day, or hour and a half or something like that. And his upbringing vastly different to mine. Yeah, we connect, and oddly, I find myself often eating, because just the way the Everest Base Camp set up. You have your cook tent for the, let's call them Western clients, and the mess tent for the Western clients, and it's more opulent in there than it is in the Sherpa mess tent. And I don't condone this, in the every diversity, everything should be equal, but it's not. And the Sherpas have their own mess tent with no carpet on the floor, with no heating, and they sit on stones down the side of the tent, and they eat dal bhat every day, which is a local food, which I happen to love. And I will be just as content and as happy, if not happier, perhaps, or more content, shoulder to shoulder with my Sherpa friends in that mess tent, as I would be with the Western clients in the other one. I mean, I just love sharing that time. If we're trekking and in the tea houses, I'll be in the kitchens. I'll go in the kitchens, and I want to see what's going on, and I just want to be part of. I don't know. I just feel that I need to connect. I need to be more than just a passing individual. I want to have a better understanding about these people who are helping us. And I know on Everest and in the Khumbu Valley that leads to Everest, where you would trek to Everest Base Camp, it's perhaps not that authentic because everybody's making a buck. But you see the same thing. I see the same thing in these people that I saw in that goat herder 20 odd years ago. I see the same thing in a remote valley in Argentina or in the Andes, or I see the same thing in a far-flung village in eastern Bhutan or North India, wherever it is. And of course, we're the Westerners, and we're
Yeah.
coming in and deemed to have the dollar, in our back pocket. And comparatively, we do.
Yeah.
So the cynic could always say, well, they're befriending you because they want your hard-earned cash. I'm not saying they're going to rob you or anything like that, but
Mhm. Yeah.
and that may be so, but there's still a generosity. They're still human beings, and you can still have this interaction and connection, and you can learn from them. Ask the questions, sit there, listen. I mean, I can't speak Nepalese, but I will happily sit there, and you can kind of get an idea of what's going on in that mess tent. And these guys are working really hard for us. They're carrying all the loads up the mountain, they're carrying all the oxygen up the mountain. They work way harder than us, and they come down exhausted each time, and they get in that mess tent and they're woofing down Dalbart, the fuel, and washing it down with gallons of sweet tea. And they're telling jokes and they're laughing and they're enjoying life. And most of them aren't on their phones because they can't afford the connection at every space camp. So there's real human interaction going on in there. And they indulge me by speaking English from time to time, or one may translate, but you can pick up what's going on. You can pick up joy. You can pick up the their exhaustion or their frustrations or their jokes, or you watch them playing cards and you're looking over their shoulder trying to understand the rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's what travel's about. That's what the community is about. That is what, for me, the mountains are about. It doesn't matter if I stand on a summit or not. It doesn't matter if it get to the base of the mountain or not. It is that. It's a cliche. We said it before. It's that journey. It's because we can
Well,
learn from.
it's authentic, and I think you've described that as they're and not even to be able to communicate with them, but it's more you're still communicating and reading through body language and through the different nonverbal signals that get sent, and I think that's fascinating that you're still able to get as much of being in that part of the community without knowing the language as if you could carry a full conversation with them. I mean, that's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
beautiful picture.
yeah, I mean, you're going to miss out on some of it, obviously. But for me, I mean, I can sit with the Sherpas for hours, and just eat the food, drink tea with them. You be able to converse with two or three of them, but the majority of are speaking Sherpa or Nepali, and
Mm,
it's the same in Pakistan. Show respect, show generosity to them, and you're going to get it back in spades.
that's cool.
And yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's one of those things that if you go the extra mile for them, then and I work on Everest, and God forbid this ever happened, but if you ever got yourself in a situation where it's going wrong high up, then you know that these guys are going to pull for you because you've invested yourself. This isn't why you do it, but you invest yourself with these guys. You spend time with them. You earn their trust. They earn your trust, and they know that I will go the extra mile for them, and vice versa. So, I think it's a really good example of showing the importance of being respectful and tolerant, and getting to
Yeah.
know the person next to you, be it your neighbor, be it the person on the train or the bus, or whoever it is.
That's true. We don't have to go around the world to practice that kind of kindness towards someone else that we may not have many similarities with. That's a great comparison. Now, let me in our final, fleeting minutes here. I can't believe we have been over an hour at this point.
I mean, we've not even talked about climbing Everest.
We haven't, yeah. So I've got to get this
but
part
that's the
in.
lovely thing about it. I mean, that's the lovely thing about the conversation. We've talked about almost everything, but
yeah. So from base camp up, I've got several specific questions around how you suffer well through that, the things that you tell yourself. But maybe if you would pick one of your treks to the summit as an example, and give us a little description of what that climb was like, and then I'll inject some questions maybe along the way. But is there one particular climb out of is it 17 or 18 summits?
17.
17
16.
summits
No, it was
of
8. No, 17. This will be 18th. So I've lost count myself,
Okay.
which is quite interesting. I mean, it just shows sort of the futility of of numbers when you do things simply. Whether you climb it 6 times, 8 times, 12 times, or 16 times, I think it is. Maybe it's 17. No, 17. It is irrelevant. But I can remember virtually each and every one. I can't tell you how many times I've been there because there's been something really significant that's happened. Generally, with the people that I'm with, the Sherpas or the clients along the way that makes it special, which again goes back to what you were saying earlier, it's the people.
Yeah. Is there one particular climb that stands out as more adventurous or more dangerous or more enjoyable?
I think obviously the first one is always super impactful. Everything is new. Every twist and turn in the ice fall is unknown. And this was back in the day before Basecamp was connected to the internet, and the expeditions were like 8 weeks long, not 4 weeks like they are today. You had to trek in and trek out. So the first one was super special. There's no getting away from that.
What year was that?
2004.
Okay.
So 20 years ago. I'd never been on an 8,000-meter peak. I had to lean heavily on my Sherpa team, most of which had been there before. And there was great faith shown in me by the person that sent me there. I was working for a UK-based company called Jagged Globe. And I pulled off this amazing climb 6 months before in the Himalayas. It was climbing for fun on Annapurna 3, and it was on the back of that they rung me up and said, "Listen, we'd like you to lead our expedition to next year." Well, actually, I was meant to be going as a second guide, but the lead guide dropped out, so I ended up in the hot seat, so to speak. And it was fantastic. I mean, I did everything wrong. I was carrying huge rucksacks, and I was trying to live the life of a Sherpa. I was absolutely exhausted at the end of it. I mean, I got back to Europe, and I couldn't work in Europe for a number of weeks. I was just absolutely physically smashed. But I loved it. I mean, I just couldn't get enough of it. I'm like, this is amazing. Because I was in the high mountains, I was surrounded by Sherpas who I love, and then fulfilling the dreams of other people. It's like, oh my God, what's not to like? But what I'm getting to is this story, and I've recounted this story a couple of times. I mean, the climb itself went relatively well, apart from being avalanched on the Lhotse face. And that was quite exciting. But summit day was this amazing day. We were unbelievably the first commercial team to get to the top that year. And there's myself and a New Zealand school teacher, I complete space his name, one of my clients. And we had a couple of Sherpas with us. And the Sherpa, and we bless him, he lost his life a few years later in an avalanche in the Annapurnas. But he slowed up. He'd been on top of Everest before. He slows up. So all of a sudden, I'm kind of looking around, and I see the Perva's not there. And he's like 20 yards behind. And he slowed up deliberately for me to get to the top first. I mean, how amazing is that? He didn't say a word. And he was way stronger than me. So he just slows up a little bit. I get there first. I just remember getting there and this overwhelming like tsunami of emotions. Like, oh my God, this is the roof of the world. And I just remember thinking, I've got to take this in. I've got to look around. I've got to use this opportunity to look at mountains that I might want to climb for fun in the future. So I'm looking around and there's this mountain way beneath me. And I'm like, wow, that looks like an amazing mountain. Look at all those ridge lines. And I need to climb that one. Okay, take a photo of that and then log it away. I'm looking at it thinking, oh, hang on. That's Amadablam, like the often called the Matterhorn of the Himalayas, which I'd climbed like 3 years previously.
Yeah.
And then it hit me that this mountain, Amadablam, it's 6,800 and some meters. And this was my introduction to like super high altitude mountaineering. And as I sat there on the summit of Everest, it struck me that this was 2 kilometers, like 1.3 miles underneath me, vertically.
Wow. And
all of a sudden, the not the achievement, but this is Everest. I mean, it just struck me how big Everest is, because I mean, it gets bashed in the media, and it's people make a bit of a mockery out of it by running up and down it really quickly, and mere novices climb it and everything else. But for me, back in 2004, that realization that this mountain Amadablam that you walk past on the base camp trek, and it dominates the base camp trek view, is 2,000 meters vertically underneath me. It totally blew my mind, and it made me feel so insignificant in this colossal thing called planet Earth. It was just unbelievable. But
Do you get
what
that
I like,
sense of, let me interject this real quick. Do you get that sense of awe of your smallness and everything else, the bigness of it? Do you get that sense of awe each time you're out there? Is that part of your experience, or does that ever kind of fade away?
I mean, hey Josh, I'd love to say it's always there, but it does fade away a little bit. But what doesn't change is as you're grinding up normally towards the south summit, so what's that, 8,700 meters or so, and we climb most of it at night. And as you're climbing up towards the south summit, if you've got your timings right, you will get dawn. And over your right shoulder, not that I know it intimately, but over my right shoulder, at about 4:15 in the morning, maybe 4:13 or thereabouts, the sun breaks the horizon in
Oh
Tibet.
my gosh.
And it is just mesmerizing. It's just because it's been dark, and then you get a faint glow, and then bang, it breaks the horizon, and you can look across like forever, because the Himalayas aren't that broad a chain, certainly not where the Everest is. And on the north side, on the Tibetan side, it's pretty much the bastion. It's a little bit like the Eiger in the Western Alps, in the Swiss Alps. The Eiger gets hit by all this bad weather because it is the first bastion of the Alps. And Everest is a little bit like that. And you can look out for like, I don't know how many hundreds of miles. I mean, you can look out forever, it feels like. And as that sun cracks the horizon and you're looking down the Rongbuk Glacier over the Tibetan Plateau into Christ knows where, you're not even insignificant. You're like a grain of sand. It's just, and that never leaves me. When we get to the top these days and I look around, I can name all the mountains. I know it's like Kanchenjunga and Makalu, and there's Amadablam, and that's going through the motions a little bit. But that sun breaking the horizon, that had never, ever grown. At no point has that ever become normal. I mean, I've got goosebumps just talking about it right now. It's just one of those colossal things that you just can't get your head around.
What does that do for you on every other day that you live not at the summit of Everest? What does that sunrise do for how you exist?
Well, I mean, I'm really lucky. A bit like growing up, I live in a farm field,
Do you
and
really?
we have, yeah, we do, and we've got these big windows in the kitchen that slide open, and we can see that the sun rises.
Oh,
No, and we can see the sun break the horizon. And for me, it's really significant. And I don't know if this is linked to Everest. Maybe it is subconsciously. But as that sun breaks the horizon, I realize that there is opportunity all the time.
wow.
And it's a new day. It's a new dawn, and that's really important. And everything which lies ahead of us, the key decisions, they're down to us. And it doesn't matter what happened yesterday. It doesn't matter what happened 2 days ago. In reality, it doesn't really matter what's going to happen in a week's time, because we have no real direct control over that. As I watch that sun come up, as I do on Everest, it's like, wow. If we put our minds to it, if there's something that we really want to do, then actually we can do it. Now, it may not happen today. It may not happen next week, this year, or even next year. Now, if one of the listeners here, wants to run a marathon, if you really want to run a marathon, you will do it. If you want to become a millionaire, if that's what you really want to do and you wholly work for it, you will earn $1 million. You will run a marathon. You will climb a mountain. And watching dawn on Everest, it just gives me hope that actually, that opportunity is there for all of us. And the other thing that gives me on Everest is because we've been climbing through the night, and there's a certain amount of anxiety that goes with it, and And I have this mantra. I think you mentioned earlier about what keeps you going, and I have this mantra that light always follows darkness. It doesn't matter how we define that darkness. We've talked, we've skirted around addiction, haven't we? I mean, there's darkness in addiction. There's darkness with depression. There's dark. I mean, there's darkness in lots of things that we do in lives. But there's always light afterwards, and that light is often has a clarity. Is even of the clarity of that light is even more so if it follows like a deep darkness.
That's exactly what I was thinking as you described that sun breaking the horizon from whether it's from your farmland or from the top of Everest, it's following the darkest part of the night.
100%. And on Everest, you're enclosed, you got your oxygen mask on, you got your hood up, you got a biting wind, and the Sherpas are around you, and it's not that pleasant. It's pretty rubbish until that sun comes up. And when that sun comes up, oh my goodness, that mountain for me becomes alive. And that's what I go for. I go to help my clients and things like that. But it needs to be more.
That's your reward. That's it.
And that's it. It's like, bang, here we go. This is a new day. And it's our day for the taking. And when you see that, and when you're so high, you know you're going to make the summit. I know that sounds a bit arrogant, but you have that feeling, and you see that sunrise, and you're like, my God, there is nothing that we can't achieve right now.
That is awesome.
It's just, and I just hope that everybody that goes up there has a similar sort of experience. It's just that sunrise.
But you know what?
I mean,
what you described, yeah. I mean, you describe it on top of Everest. I don't. I've never been that high in the mountains, but I love the mountains. I love the East Coast and the Appalachian Mountains. The West Coast, I love being in the Rockies and in the U.S. and a lot of that sense of awe that you're talking about. But man, being in those places and seeing the sunrise, it's different. It's different than being there in the middle of the day. And so I'm totally right tuned in with what you're describing, even though I've never set foot in that high up in the world. It's amazing how ubiquitous that is. Right.
It doesn't matter where you are. You can be in the European Alps. You can be on a footpath somewhere. I mean, I occasionally get in the city. I mean, if you're up early in a city, when the first rays are perhaps working their way through the skyscrapers, you get the same sort of awe. You perhaps don't get the vastness, but when there's not many people around, and there is something about dawn. I mean, I love sunrises and I love sunsets, but sunrises, I think, because as we said, it's light following darkness, and what lays ahead in the day ahead it's down to you, and it's down to you alone, and it's whether you want to embrace it or not, and that's what that's what I feel on Everest when I see that sun break the horizon.
Yeah, and it seems to me that's something that you will have access to even after your last trip up Everest, right? Maybe there's a day where you can't or don't want to physically make that trek to the top. But as you just said, there are endless number of opportunities in the world to still find that sunrise.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it doesn't have to be Everest. I mean, we could get into the metaphor. What is Everest? Everest is your Everest. But I could be walking the fields here, and I would see the same thing. There is, for me at least, there's a certain joy in getting up early, and seeing the new dawn, and it's a really powerful thing, and it always brings me hope. There's we talked about it much earlier in the conversation here. When I used to beat myself up when I first moved back to the UK from France, and there were days which you can only describe as dark. I was thinking I should be climbing, I shouldn't be doing this, but seeing a sunrise always gave me hope. And you can sit on on a coastline and watch the sunrise. You can sit on a hilltop, where I live here and watch the sunrise. It doesn't really matter where you do it. I mean, the location is almost irrelevant. There is something almost spiritual. I mean, I'm not a religious person. I do believe in spirituality, and there is something spiritual about about watching a sunrise.
I completely get that. And I just finished a book that this reminds me of, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most read books in the world. I just happened to read it for the first time, but it's the same thing he talks about from a different point of view, obviously, but a man has to have that hope that there is an opportunity for better in the future. And he describes it in the concentration camps. He was in 4 different ones through World War II, that he knew when other prisoners were in their final days, because that hope was gone. Whatever the hope was, they gave up on that, and that was always the end. And we obviously, you and I don't live through circumstances like that, but I think we share that common humanity where we do have to have a sense of hope about what the future holds. And without it, it's very dark. Those days are very, very dark. So
yeah, I mean, Frankel's writing is, it's super powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And if people haven't read it, I would implore them. You don't need to necessarily read his books, but just you go online, you find some of his quotes, you can find some of the passages that he's written. I mean, just an incredible human being. And I think if there's anybody that sums up hope, is any of the survivors of, and obviously Frankel was, as you say, in the concentration camps during Nazi Germany during the war. There's not that many of them left these days, but as I say, without hope, we are nothing.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing, never to lose grasp of.
And I love that you get that reminder in the mountains, and that's a really, really vivid illustration that I think I'll be left with after this conversation. God, I got so many other questions that I would love to throw at you. Maybe we need to do, conversation 2.0 at some point. But my son Hudson, I told him about this conversation and a little bit about you, and he was just blown away. He said, "You've got to ask him these questions." So I can't get off here without asking you a couple questions from Hudson. You've already answered how long it took you to get up. What tools did you use, and how cold was it on top of it? Is it typically on top of Everest?
It varies a lot. I mean, it was really cold last year. There was a savage cold wind blowing last year. So, I would say like minus 30, minus 35 last year. It was really bad. Like the sat phone, the battery died. I used my cell phone to take photographs. That battery died. I thought I contracted frostbite in my fingers. Yeah, it was really cold last year. So it's minus 30, 35 centigrade. But then other times have been up there, and it's been pretty mellow. If there's no wind, gloves can come off, and you can happily spend quite a lot of time there. And
seriously,
I got pictures myself on the summit with no gloves on. It's all down to the wind. And if the wind's up, it's brutally cold. So luckily, the weather forecasting that we have these days is pretty good. So we can pick and choose to an extent. But I mean, it's always cold at night when we're climbing. But traditionally, anywhere between minus 20 and minus 25 when the sun's down. But when the sun comes up.
Is it possible with any really, really good gear to get warm in that, or is that part of the suffering that you've signed up for, that you just know you're going to be cold?
Oh, you broke up there, Josh. What was it? Just say that again.
Yeah, at that temperature, is there gear that can keep you warm in that, or is that just part of the suffering that you sign up for?
No.
You're going to be cold.
It's pretty good. I mean, like modern equipment, the big down suits that we wear, arguably they're too warm, especially on the way down. I mean, the down suits that we have, think sleeping bag with arms and legs. The boots that we have, like triple layer boots, incredibly warm, heated socks, heated footbeds, big mittens, and you can use the little chemical hand warmers that you might use skiing, and you put those inside. So, generally we're not that cold, unless you're trying to do something like I was last year on the summit. I was we're trying to phone my wife to say we're on top and things like that, and take photographs with the client. That sort of thing, unfortunately, is where the danger lies with losing fingertips on Everest anyway. It's not the most technical climb in the world, so we're not using 2 ice axes, and we're not trying to fiddle bits of gear in and coil and uncoil ropes. So the equipment, even compared with 20 years ago when I was first there, is kind of chalk and cheese. And the technology we have, i.e. the weather forecasting, the oxygen delivery systems, is amazing. And so,
what's the most technical climb that you have done, if Everest isn't all that technical?
I mean, I've got some new routes to my name on Denali. They're pretty hard. I was climbing there in the early 2000s. Epurna 3, which we climbed back in 2003. That's in terms of like high mountains. We did some hard climbing on that. But in reality, I suppose the most technical climbing, or the hardest technical climbing I've done, is probably in the European Alps.
Okay.
Yeah, the really big mountains. Yeah, the really big mountains, because of the height and the logistics and everything else, generally isn't super technical, certainly compared with what we would normally climb closer to sea level.
Interesting. Well, Kenton, you've been more than generous with your time to do this. And do I still have you there? The screen froze up on me.
Josh. Oh, you're back.
There we go. Okay. Maybe can you hear me? Are we still there?
Oh, you're back. You're back again, Josh.
Okay. Maybe the internet is telling us that it's time to cut it off here.
Oh,
I can still see you,
Josh.
Kenton. Can you hear me?
Oh, I got you back. I got you back.
Okay. Yeah. I was just saying maybe the internet is telling us that it's time to cut this conversation off. So
maybe it's time to dock this, and we should come back around for it. But okay, that's why I got you. What other questions did Hudson have?
That was it, man. It was, what tools did you use? And maybe you could narrow it down to, what is your favorite tool when you're mountain climbing? We there?
Yeah, I got you back. I heard what pulls you. Let's try and get this question done, and then perhaps we should dock this.
Yeah, what is your favorite tool when you're mountain climbing? To have you back?
Hey, Josh.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's going on, but
I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, let's go ahead and pull it into doc, and I'll just say again, Kenton, thank you for your time. This has fulfilled everything that I hope to get out of this conversation, and certainly I've got a million more questions, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join this fledgling podcast and answer all my curious questions, and I really appreciate you doing it.
No, absolute pleasure, Josh. Thanks for being so patient. As we said before, I don't quite know what happened at the end there, but we dropped out a little bit. But no, it's been a pleasure. I always enjoy doing these. I love the conversation style that you have, and yeah, keep on rocking. And hey, you never know, I might see you on a hillside one day soon.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. All right, thanks for listening. And I sincerely mean that, because I'm extremely grateful that you choose to spend this time with me. I don't take it for granted, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more content like this, be sure to check out material on my website at ridgelinewealthadvisors.com. That's advisors with an ORS. And sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Money Trail Guide, which you can find on the blog page. Until next time, I hope you pursue your own great adventure.